In the name of the Academy of Social and Political Academy,
Bienvenida a todos los participantes.
I welcome all participants in this event.
Para el día de hoy, para
that was organized for today to study the formation of the Republic and the Venezuelan territory, according to what is established in the Constitution of Venezuela. The Academy has organized a series of events that are going to be developed during the whole year until March 2022 in order to study the different manifestations of the problematic between Venezuela and Guayana.
For la Academia de Ciencias Políticas y Sociales cuenta con la contribución de
the
los
Academy counts with the contribution of the highly scholars Brewer-Carías, Cecilia, Sosa, Gómez, Carlos Ayala, Corao, and Jesús, María, Casal.
De hoy, dirigido y moderado por el
and this act is going to be moderated by the scholar Ramón Escobar León,
con el evento.
who I give the floor right now for him to continue. Thank you very much. Thank you to the second Vice President of the Academy, Rafael Badel Madrid, and also for the push that he has given together with Héctor Faúndez and Cecilia Sosa to the realization of this cycle of conferences, which is a very important subject, which is the conflict of Venezuela with Guyana. As it's been pointed out, we're going to talk about the formation of the Republic and the Venezuelan territory in the constitutions. And we have 4 jurists dedicated, jurists in a broad sense, thinkers of law, and of course, there are constitutional lawyers that are going to talk about this issue. The order is going to be Brewer-Carías, then Jesús, María, Casal. We have a small change of order because Professor Casal has a class. After Carlos Ayala, and Cecilia Sosa will close. Well, to present Brewer-Carías is a task that is mostly unnecessary because we all know him, because of his large contribution to the Academy. So simply would like to highlight once more that beyond the intellectual conditions is a more important writer of the history of this country, and that is how I present him. Dr. Brewer, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Ramón Escobar for his generous presentation. And thank you for the Academy for the organization of this event. I feel very honored to participate in this panel of the formation of the Republic and its territory in the constitutions of the country. The formation legal political of the territory, it was from the provinces of the colony. They were established in a period of 260 years, 1525, 1865, occupying the territory of what is now Venezuela. In chronological order, Margarita, Venezuela or Caracas, Nueva Andalucía or Cumaná, Guayana, Maracaibo, and Marinas. 6 provinces that configured the territory. Coming from the principle that the province for Spain was a creation that it made for America. In Spanish, it didn't exist the division in 3 provinces until 1812 of the Constitution of Cádiz. But throughout the whole colony, that conception of province was conceived for America.
De manera que esa institución, la provincia,
that institution of the province, what was originated the occupation of territory. In a colony, the provinces were grouped in viceroyalties for the effects of government purpose and audiences for judicial purposes. These provinces that were established in Venezuela were developed independently with autonomy, and some of them depended of the Viceroyalty of Spain and others to the Viceroyalty of Peru, that then was the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. and others depending on the audience of Santo Domingo and others of the audience of Santa Fe. Hence, there were not a unity or territorial integration, and the centers of authority over them were very far away from the territory of Venezuela. They were in Santa Fe and Bogotá, or in Santo Domingo, in the island of La Española. Therefore, the Turian of century 18, Carlos III, put forward the thinking of put together something that coherent because of the distance that were too far away from the capital of that. And therefore, some royal decrees were dictated until 1793. Producing that way for the first time the territorial integration of all these provinces. It was created the royal audience of head of public, the Captaincy General of Venezuela, the royal audience of Caracas, and the royal consulate of Caracas, meaning the four pillars: military, of government, and judicially, and of a man of activity, of economic activity that conform the colonial scheme. And that with a very large territory. That to the east, when the Captaincy General of Venezuela is created, until the Essequibo River, but before the creation of the Captaincy General, when the Guayana province was created in 1568, the limit to the east was Amazona River. I say that the Essequibo is what exists in 1777 when the Captaincy General is created, because with the treaty known as the Westphal Peace, Spain recognized the independence of the Netherlands, and they recognized that there are positions in America that they're there and to the east of the Essequibo River. That's the scheme of the provinces that were then in the Captaincy General of Venezuela. Hence, when the foundational process was produced in 1811, the territory of the new state was not defined. It was simply said that the Constitution of 1811, it was decreed that the representatives of the provinces, Margarita, Mérida, Amazonas, Cumaná, Barinas, Barcelona, Trujillo, and Caracas. And it was left open the possibility that Coro, Maracaibo, and Guayana will join the Confederation once they will reach the liberation. But it was not defined a territory. There it was just the representatives of the 10 provinces that who adopted the Constitution. Only one definition occurred in the territory of one of the provinces, which is actually the province of Guayana. When Guayana was liberated in 1817 and it was incorporated to the province, to the Republic, Bolivar emitted a decree the 15th October 1817, setting the limits of the province. And it said, to the north, the fluent of the river to the desembocadura of Orinoco, of Rio Grande, which is, and the coast to the sea until the Fort Turuca. The Fort Turuca is a fort that it was in the river Turuca. That it was before to the west to the Essequibo River. So they were lacking space of coast to the west to River Turuca, that it was landed there on that limitation, it was excluded there. And that even appeared that way in the charter or the letter that Corao made in 1840s about the situation of the provinces of Venezuela in 1824, and it appeared a space between the Boruca River and the Essequibo in the Atlantic coast, that it was excluded, and it was appeared indication that was took by the English. After this brief incidents with that territorial division, it came the Angostura Constitution of 1819. Here, the Constitution divided territory in the same 10 provinces, and it numbers them, the 10 provinces. However, this was a definition that it will pass constitutionally or materially only 4 months, because the Constitution of 1819, it was immediately modified in the Constitution of in December. It was dictated a law once Bolívar went to Nueva Granada after the battles of Puente Vargas and Daca. When he liberated Nueva Granada, he went back to Angostura and proposed to the Congress that the fundamental law of Colombia was approved. As the previous understood Captain General of Venezuela and the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. The article of 115,000 kilometers. It's interesting to know that that law of 1819, it incorporates as a definition of a territory of what it was Venezuela, the antique Captain General of Venezuela. So we can say now that 2 years later of that decree of Bolívar that defined that province of Guayana, excluding an area in the ending of Orinoco River, Essequibo River, it was originated by this law of the 19, because that law of the 19 goes to the limits of the provinces on the Captaincy General of Venezuela, and those limits did not exclude nothing to the west of Essequibo. That law of year 19, the fundamental law of the Republic of Colombia after the Congress of Villa, Rosario, and Cúcuta, it was reunited in year 21. That Congress, already with representatives of Nueva Granada and Venezuela, approved its own law that it called that time the fundamental law of the unity of people of Colombia. And with that, in that case, that law, it was established once again the limits of the Republic of Colombia. That referred to what it once was the Captain General of Venezuela and the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. And the same happened in the Constitution of Colombia, the one that we are celebrating now, 200 years. It also defined the territory with a basis on the reference of what it was, the Captaincy General of Venezuela and the provinces of the Nueva Granada. So what it refers to what it is now Venezuela, in that constitution, it was established that it should be a law of territorial division, and for that effect, it was a 32 division territory in the year 21 and year 24. In year 21, in that law of territorial division of Colombia in 7 provinces, 3 are what it was now Venezuela: Orinoco, Venezuela, and Zulia. And in the year 24, it was left 4 departments that it were incorporated, Quito, etc. And therefore, in what it was Venezuela, it left 4: Orinoco, Venezuela, Apure, and Zulia. And that is the configuration, the territorial configuration that exists when the separation of Venezuela was produced from Colombia in the year 1930. And the Constitution of 1830, it once again repeats that the territory of the Republic is the conformed by the, but where it was the Captaincy General of Venezuela. The point of year 30 is very important because that Constitution defines the territory in conformity with was the Captaincy General of Venezuela, and it says precisely the territory was the captaincy before the political transformation of 1810. Because once again, with that decree, it is excluded or derogated any possible modifications after 1810, as that territory that it was mentioned until the river of Boruca. This that it comes from the Colombian law of the year 24, that it becomes to below in that division of the Venezuelan territory. But those territories of departments converted in provinces, they were defined in the Constitution of 1830 according to 12 provinces. And those provinces are the ones that appear even shown in the famous Atlas of Agustín Codazzi that completely define the territory, even when we must say that the Atlas of Codazzi, what it has to be with the province of Guayana, it marked what it was in the decree of Bolivar. There is an area in the north part of the ending, between the ending of the Orinoco River and River Buruca, that it appears excluded from the area of Guayana, and it appears as took by the English. That situation of the law of the year 24 of Colombia, nevertheless, it still applies in Venezuela, and it's only substituted in 1856 when the the territorial division law, it was emitted, and as now is the only that we have had. And it described the provinces that are more or less equivalent to our states, as have been developed until now. The limits between the states, the constitutions of the time of the Federation, between 1864 and the end of the century, but definitely changing of names, of size. But at the end, to the end of the century, to the Constitution of 1901, all the territorial areas appear again that were the provinces that became states in the Constitution of 1864 and the law of the territorial division that is still the one of 1856. Now, in particular about the province of Guyana, we have seen then that it was the unique one that it was subject to territorial precision, and the decree of Bolivar was derogated for the laws that came after. So a very important thing that we see when we study Guyana, all the colonial provinces were established by royal charters, but apart from that, by towns, cities, Indian towns, Spanish towns, and the missions. And the missions were the instrument of occupation of the whole zone of Guayana and Orinoco. Jesuits and Capuchins were the two orders that were in charge of that occupation. And that occupation occurred until the Essequibo River. Even very interesting to see the report that was prepared in 1897 by the order of the President of the United States to determine the true division between Venezuela and the British Guayana. And in that document, I had the opportunity to consult. There appeared the occupancy by the missions of the area of Guayana until the Essequibo River. And there was, the territory was extended. And the last element is that according to the federal constitutions, it was created the figure of the federal territories. And those territories were created in 1864, the Amazon territory, the territory Uruani, and the Delta territory in 1864. And in all of those federal territories, particularly the Uruani, it was established the limits between the Caroni River and the Essequibo River without any exclusion. And the same way it appeared the case of Delta, with also reference to the Essequibo, which was the limit of the Holland Guayana and the English Guayana. In general, I had maps, but we didn't have time to show them, to show the process of the confirmation of Venezuela in the Constitution of Venezuela. Thank you very much again. And I apologize for the time. Thank you very much for Professor Brewer for his excellent presentation. this shows a very detailed work that he has developed. It makes me remember the Jesuit father, Germán Rosales Oropesa, that he also did studies, very precise studies, detailed studies in regards to the territorial history. So now I present now to Jesús María Casal. He, as his father, has characterized to possess the constitutional thinking on their own, is the Dean of the Faculty of Law of Universidad Católica Andrés Bello, and he just came back after a time in Germany. You have the floor, Jesús María, for 15 minutes. Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Escobar. It's an honor for me to intervene in this event about the formation of the Republic and the territory of the Constitution in Venezuela. The Academy of Social and Political Academics is doing a series of conferences about the Essequibo, and it corresponds to me to address some subjects from the constitutional perspective. I'm going to address 5 topics of constitutional significance according to the criteria of division of a territory and the controversy of the Essequibo. First, the provinces of the Captaincy General of Venezuela and the formation of the Republic. The Act of Independence of July 1811 said that it was adopted by the representatives of the provinces that conform the Confederation of Venezuela in the continent. That allusion, that address to the Confederation of Venezuela was presented to the idea that the insertion of the independence movement of Venezuela in a context, in an American context, and at the same time to the search of making our own way to the nationality. So the Republic, it was originated to the union of the provinces, the same that were responding to the Cabildo of Caracas to join the new government, and then the election of representatives to the Congress of Provinces of Venezuela. That rule referred to Venezuela, to the unity of deputies that will contribute to this foundational pact that has been qualified as Brewer-Carías as a federation of provinces. It was structured on the basis of the provincial division that the political regime of the monarchy of Spain have left. The province of Guayana, the largest one that belonged to the Captain General of Venezuela, with a great economic relevance and strategic as well. It was with members that respond to the board of Caracas, but that unity was dissolved rapidly, as well as the province of Maracaibo and Coro. It didn't participate in the Congress General of Venezuela, but on the pronouncement of that rulement of Rocio, after the emancipation, the independence, it corresponded to all the provinces of the Captaincy General of Venezuela. That was reflected in the Constitution of 1811, that without referring especially to the principle of territorial significance, in which it was presented to the principle of iudice possidetis juris, the Article 128, because it was expected the incorporation of province of Maracaibo, because the province of Guayana was essential to this cause. After Bolivar will write to Martín Tobar Ponte in 1807. Finally, we have Guayana free. In this correspondence, Bolivar also but now the trend is not what it rules. It was almost a presage for the luck that the Republic will have in regards to that province in the award of 1819. So the principle of established expressly that the territory of Venezuela was what it corresponded to the Captaincy General of Venezuela, that it was joined as well by the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. So that principle of iudice possidetis juris, it's maintained until now in our constitutions. Since the Constitution of 1830, it was said expressly that that division was a point of temporary reference for the Universitas. The Constitution of Venezuela of 1830, it was said directly that the Universitas juris was described before. According to the limits of Venezuela, they were supposed to be the same that they were in the Captaincy General of Venezuela, as well as the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada. As it was affirmed by Zambrano Velasco, what it was possessed by the Captaincy General of Venezuela, it will also be possessed by the Republic of Venezuela of 1810. It was taken as reference by the great territories of Spain, the Viceroyalty and Captaincy General, not only the provinces. The instructions given by Bolívar to Miguel Santa Maria in 1821, sent first to Peru, Chile, and Buenos Aires, and then to Mexico, it was considered another decisive step in the conception of Universitas juris. There, it was asked to those governments not to enter in negotiations with Spain that will compromise the integrity of the respective territories, how they were conceived before 1810. Bolívar also applied these concepts in regards to the Republic in Bolivia in the audiences of Charcas. It also was an important concept in the Congress of Panama, as it was formulated by Colombia for them to also use the principles of Universitas juris to set the territory. In what it concerns to the territory of Essequibo, they were ordered that some diplomatic acts were committed, and this gave place of what is being considered to be recognized in the, or a tacit recognition, according to Chas Ericilleta, from Great Britain to the border to Essequibo, which Venezuela has alleged, according to its Universitas juris. And the Treaty of Great Britain, without this to formulate any objections, according to the description memories of the territory of Guayana Essequibo. According to this memoir, the Republic of Colombia extended at the Sea of North from the Essequibo River to the ends of the province of Guayana onto the river of Culebras, and this until the Essequibo River marked the border on the west with Colombia. After the lines were set in the maps of Tromberg, they were produced the protests of Venezuela by Alego Furtique, who was the council. In 1844, there were negotiations to develop this. Setting these negotiations, these comments of Hilford Tool also said that these negotiations influenced in the decision of Venezuela. This province also recognized all the costs since the ending of Orinoco and Morocco, in order to not disprotect the indigenous tribes. This consideration was considered to violate the sovereignty of Venezuela, that in all cases, to be acceptable, Great Britain will assume a similar obligation in regards to the territory and the proposed lines. Hilford was right away, he said that the Constitution of 1830 allowed the Congress to allow the violation of a territory because this was also violated by the Constitution. A proof that this issue was not entirely constitutional because inconstitutionality cannot be succeeded by after it disappeared the possibility to, in the 1858 Constitution, the prohibition to cede the other territories to another foreign potency. It is debatable the contribution of this author to how it was handled in the afterwards, the negotiation with the with the death of Portique, and especially to have retired the naming of Baral as the secretary, it impeded that after his death, Baral continued diplomatic activities that forth the award of Paris and of Paris and Utis Postietes Juris. The position of Venezuela, it was to invoke the Utis Postietes Juris applied to the constitutional principles that could be transferred to Great Britain 1814, joined by other international principles as a treaty between Great Britain and Venezuela. They committed to not occupy the disputed territory. However, the abuses from Great Britain did not stop. The controversy must stop in a form of law. Great Britain preferred the negotiated solutions, conscious of their position, and the position of vulnerability of Venezuela in respect to the international community. The position of Venezuela, as it was posed by Guzman Blanco in 1864, it was a constitutional provision of not to cede territory to foreign territories. Guzman said in the memorandum that it couldn't be said that the Constitution was violated. The adaptation applied the same for the argument of Guilford Toole in regards to the prohibition of ceding any territory. In any case, Venezuela was searching an arbitration solution, as we already know, fraud and void arbitration award. It led Venezuela to be unable to sustain its position before the international community. However, it was such the violation and the fraud committed by that arbitration award that the composition of that tribunal that were determined by the nullity of that arbitration award. Fifth, the treaties that were validly celebrated by Venezuela. A parenthesis in regard to the objections. I'm going to refer to this fifth element and refer to the Constitution of 1861 and the modification that since then it was suffered, that the formulation of the rule of Utis Postietes Juris as it was conceived since the Constitution of 1901. That contemplated the habitual form of Utis Postietes with the illusion of the sign of public treaties. From that constitution, there were mentions of some treaties celebrated by the Republic, but in the conception of 1961, the adverb validly was added. This way, the constitutional text, it echoed the rights and claimings of Venezuela of its territory. Rafael Caldera explained in a session of the Chamber of Deputies in 1960 this way. We consider that with including the adverb validity, it is admitted to guarantee the Venezuelan rights over territory. In the case of the British Guayana, we know that Venezuela has the right to reivindicate. So this adverb, it affirms that the will of the constitutional writer is not to left aside the rights of Venezuela over this territory. So this was to ratify the claims that it was raised before. In this occasion, the same position was expressed by the Vice Chancellor of Venezuela. All of this was the background of the claiming of Venezuela before the United Nations. Then the Geneva Agreement, which has a succession of events that I will not try to summarize. The final reflection is I will have to highlight the importance of that the subject of the Essequibo must be taken seriously in these crucial moments that the cause is before the International Court of Justice. It will not, by destructory measures that Venezuela will affirm effectively. nor either but constitutional reforms. It is not the way to do it either through constitutional reforms, while the authorities are not willing to defend their rights before international forums. How this academy has affirmed before, the recovery of the Essequibo territory, it will be achieved by defending our rights before the International International Court of Justice and its claim that it has before that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Jesús María Casal for its excellent presentation. That also it's been like a dialogue. It's been a dialogue with the previous presentation of Brewer-Carías. And also, despite the problems of connections that connection that Casal had, we had the fortune that we don't have interruption during his interruption. I celebrate that as well. So now I will present my dear friend Carlos Ayala Corao, constitutional lawyer with an extensive written work with us in reference to these issues. He's been a person who's always been aware in and participant in these issues, not only human rights attorney, Walter Wright, that participated in an English company for his trips in 1595. It's pretty sad in that zone. He will call it the island of Guyana. Why the island of Guyana? Because he visualized that between the Orinoco River and Amazonas, that divide the territory of South America, it generates this great island that he calls the island of Guyana, together with Trinidad. And in his report, in his work report, recovery of 1596, that he directs to the Court of St. James, it recommends precisely to the empire to set his eye in the Atlantic Ocean between the Orinoco River and Amazonas. Well, this prediction, it will be accomplished, as you know, not only with the occupation that they did, they even took out those territories from the Netherlands, but the invasions that they were conducted from a territory that was fundamentally belonged to the Captain General of Venezuela in the Royal Charter of Carlos III, which they invaded in it is recognized from the part of the Spanish government, but that was the first time when the territory was took. When it was said that the territory of Venezuela is what corresponded to the Captain General of Venezuela, because to that moment, the Captain General was already dismembered of one fundamental province, which was precisely the Trinidad province. But apart from that element, we're going to see how the Netherlands is also continue to occupy from the 16th century certain invasions with some characteristics and there it will establish fundamentally plantations, commerce with indigenous populations of the zone. And those three possessions that will give place to that only this possession, that it was be recognized by Spain after the separation of the reign of the Netherlands, which is now Netherlands, which is the peace treaty of Minster, where it was recognized that possession to the Netherlands in the coast of Guyana. But those possessions were to the east of Esequibo, were precisely those three possessions which were going to be subject and basis for the invasion of Spanish territory and after Venezuelan territory after its independence. Going to be some acts during the colony from the crown of Spain. Those invasions from the part of the Netherlands, in particular in 1758, they established a post in the Cuyuni River who was destroyed by the Spanish troops. But all French and Dutch and the English were going to conduct a series of invasions. Also, the take of Santo Tomé, which is the major population that Spain were going to found during that period. So those three possessions that were going to be acquired by the English. First, as I told you before, by de facto occupancy that it was taken by England on the possessions, and then in 1814, with the sign of the treaty between the Netherlands and England, it was considered those territory to the Dutch, which has to be with these three territories. But to that time, it was considered that the limit that was accepted of those territories, it was the margin, the east margin of Esequibo River. The province of Guyana, I don't have time to extend on that. However, it has its origin since when Diego de Ordaz in 1530, it has a royal charter to populate all that territory until the end of the Orinoco River. Because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, it had a great extension. The name is actually was actually given after Antonio de Berrio, who insisted that the real name of that province, it should be the Guayana of Guayana. It went for one to be named Trinidad Guayana, but the crown gave entity on itself to those provinces. I don't have time to study how that province of Guayana, Spanish, is going to depend. It's going to depend firstly of the audience of Nueva Andalucía the real audience of Santo Domingo, and then it will depend from Santa Fe. And it will come going forward until 1786, when it was created, the Royal Audience of Caracas, the Royal Charter, after 1777, that it will talk about precisely of those provinces. Now, what I want to highlight is that for that moment, all the invasions, the Dutch invasions, beyond the Esequibo River, are going to be repealed or are going to be subject to protests of the Netherlands when the Spanish destroyed their fort, and also protests from Spain, precisely when the Dutch pretend to occupy even set posts in the endings of the Orinoco River. This was it is very important because this is one of the rivers that in the arbitration it was partially conceded to with extra limitation and international navigation. So this way, moving forward, that province, the Spanish province, is going to be incorporated later to the process of independence with an attitude, with a hesitant attitude, because even when after 1810, so the government of Guayana joined the board of Caracas. Immediately, a few months later, it changed its decision, and the 3 of July 1810, it maintained loyal to the council of Fernando VII. And then it will continue under the Spanish government until the Simón Bolívar troops reached there, and PR as well. And in 1817, when Simón Bolívar signed the decree of incorporation of Guayana to the Republic, affirmed that the province of Guayana, in all its exception, it will be reunited with the territory of Venezuela, and form since today part of the Republic. It's been mentioned before that the Constitution of 1811, it's curious that these first constitutions do not have an article about the territory. And they assume, even though they don't expressly say that territory is the territory of the Captaincy General of Venezuela. But in that first constitution, the province of Guayana was not a part of the independence movement. And that is why it doesn't have a representative either in the General Congress. And that is why in Article 128, it is said that after those provinces, Coro, Maracaibo, and Guyana will be free and can join the territory, they will have that consideration as well. It was mentioned before the decree of Simón Bolívar in 1817, where the limits of the province of Guayana were set. Certainly, there's reference about the department of Orinoco. And the coast of the sea until the fort of Moruca, which was a fortress. It was occupied by the Dutch and then occupied by the English. And it was 180 kilometers from the ends of Orinoco River. So in the worst case scenario, the invasion for that time, to the west of Essequibo, it will only reach a little fraction that it was recognized, or not recognized, sorry, that it was designed, that it was with that territory that was invaded by the English but not accepted. In the Constitution of Angostura, that it was established as a territory. It was divided in 10 provinces, and the province of Guayana was expressly mentioned there. In the 1821 Constitution, it makes reference to the territory but it corresponded to the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada and the Captaincy General of Venezuela. But looked at in 1823, under that Constitution of the Great Colombia, the government of Bogota required to the representative, the diplomatic representative in London, Sir Jose Rafael Revena, to participate the determination of the limits, the borders, which to be beyond the Essequibo, they are occupying territory that were and belong to the Captaincy General of Venezuela, and we have taken from Spain. So since very early it's been observed those positions, they're going to be claimed. In 1821, Francisco Antonio Sea addressed the First Minister of Great Britain, affirming that the limits on the east will finish at the Essequibo, being the river flow on the left, the frontier, the border of the Dutch Guyana. So this way, we again do it in 1823, in 1824, and at the same time, it was requested the affirmation that the great Colombia goes from the Essequibo River until the end of And that is why in 1825, when the Great Britain recognized the Great Colony, it do it without any objection. And our Constitution of the year 30 makes reference to the territory of the Captains General of Venezuela before 1810. This recognition of Great Britain is very important because to that moment, it is already determined which are the borders that it corresponds. However, as we already know, the occupations and invasions from the English, the first line of Schomburg that pretend to go and that pretend to extend over the line, the eastern line of the Essequibo. In the years 1840 to 1850, Venezuela takes a series of proclamations. The maps of Codazzi, as we already said, sets an occupation uniquely onto the Orinoco River and the River Cuyuni, but it says expressly, but the dispossessed territories by the English. The English pretend to reach the end of Kuruma and Barima, and that time it starts a very intense negotiation at the Ministry of Fortique that he achieved that that the lines established by Schomburg retired and almost reached a negotiation, but unfortunately the death of Fortique leaves these negotiations. But we are seeing how Venezuela, even in the negotiations, the first letter to Alejo Fortique affirms that the negotiation, it will start understanding that the territory of Venezuela reaches until the Essequibo River. Simply, I want to note that in that law of 1856 regarding the territory division of the Republic, and that affirms on the territory of the Venezuela that corresponded to the ones that were part of the Captaincy General of Venezuela. It mentions the province of Guayana, that it forms part of Pérez Upata and Alto Orinoco. Why is it important? Because the second canton, the Utaca, is going to be invaded by the English after this law. After this law, English will reach into Tumerengo, Guasipati, and Upata. And we have population that were founded there, and we have a recognition by the force, by our constitutions and our laws. This will be gathered, as Dr. Casal already mentioned, and I'll be finished here, in our constitutions, the province of Guayana, as an independent state, in the Constitution of 1864. Afterwards, the English invasions will continue, and the protests of Venezuela regarding that as well. That province of Guayana will be subject of an evolution to state in the time of Guzman Blanco. Other new in a rupture of relations with England because of an invasion over the Cuyuni River and the population of Guasipati. The protest of Venezuela and the claiming of Venezuela afterwards, because it will even reach the ending of Orinoco River, the English presence. So that is why it seeks support from the United States that intervene, as you know. It is interesting to finish with two constitutions. The constitution under which the arbitration was made at Treaty of Washington of 1891. It expressly recognized the province of Guayana as an entity that was complete, that it comes to be state of Guayana, Bolívar, and Apure, and the Constitution of 1893 that repeats that the 9 states of Guzman becomes now great states. And important is that despite of the dispossessions that we will talk about other cycle of conferences, the Constitution of 1891 is the first one that said that the territory of the United States of Venezuela was correspondent to what it was before 1810 of the Capacity General of Venezuela, with the modifications that were resulted from the public treaties, a reference that it was made after 1961 to the treaties that were validly celebrated by the Republic. And in 1899, the Constitution affirmed as well, with the modifications that resulted from the treaties and arbitrary awards that were not null and void. With this, I finished, as I started telling you, that the constitutional evolution of Venezuela and the evolution of the facts of the colony, since the Crown of Spain had in charge these lands, always protesting and claiming the invasion to the west of the Essequibo by the Dutch, English, and by French, historically pretend to give a truthful proof that our utus potietis juris is backed by an utus potietis and a reclamation of those invasions. Therefore, the dispossession that pretend to be confirmed by the arbitration award of Paris, and this is now a subject of judgment before the International Court of Justice, is null and void because it lacked motivation and it incurred in ultra petita in regards to not only the legal titles but the possession titles. Thank you very much, and apologies for the extension. Thank you very much, my excellent friend Carlos Ayala, for his also excellent presentation. This allows us conclude that the defense of the Venezuelan territory, it needs to know the constitutional history of Venezuela as well. The three presentations sets a dialogue between each other. Before giving the floor to Cecilia Sosa, I want to greet the presence of the floor of Salvador Llanusi, Luis Cova, and Humberto Romero Musi. These two ladies are president of the Academy, and Emilio Noel, professors María Concepción Molino, María Amparo Grau, Eloy Torres, Ramón Alvins, and I don't know if Erika Cañizales, I don't know if I'm leaving anyone out. I ask for a place and thank them for their presence. So now I present women with an admirable capacity of work, Secretary of the Academy, Cecilia Sosa.
Relación de admiración y de amistad.
We have a long relationship of admiration. I'm sure that she'll make us enjoy with her presentation and invite us to reflect on this. Thank you very much, Ramon. Really, my presentation is going to be divided in 3 points. The first point, the time and constitutions. The second, the impact of the colonial institutions over the territory. And in third place, what the constitutions say in relation to the territory, and a conclusion. Talking about the time and constitution is like to understand that the past is not only history. It can only be present since the moment that we place ourselves in the time that we want and the context. And I believe that a lot of the presentations have been presented that relation between the time and the constitution. It's a very challenging vision because in our territorial history that will allow us really what we are as a nation. And at the same time, it comes with the interest to prepare ourselves for what it will happen and what it awaits us in relation to this issue of the Essequibo. The importance of the Constitution in the formation of the Republic and the impact of the time in law and the constitutional procedure that took us to the formation of the Republic is one of its bases in the territory. And that time, it is filled with procedures of diplomatic interventions, and it has been evidences in the previous presentations. I say that the Constitution's law to comply with a procedure make us relate or understand the Venezuelan constitutions, placing them in the Caribbean. And that way, evaluate the time of their elaboration, the drafting, and evaluate how it was left aside the need of the process to decolonization for a new order of social conduct. What does it mean? Place the process of formation of the Republic of Venezuela and the territory in time. This is how to achieve the decolonization for a new order of a social conduct. Venezuela forms part of the Cuenca of the Caribbean. We are diversity and unity. Territory were characterized to have limitless places without a center, with a permanent unpredictability of nature. The orality prevails, the word, the memoir is a sort of invisible library. It always prevails the denial of the official history that is linked to the victors. That is part of our conflict. Hence, that official history in which it enters the constitutions, the ones that appear to ignore the problematic vision of what it was, our territory, our plantations, makes that the dominant culture is a sort of mixture between American, European colonial dependency that the process of deconstruction is marked by the structural violence and the difference in ethnicity. Hence, is that the rule of law, the monarchist rule of law that takes form 300 years, it will be prolonged to 1821, when the administration and of justice of Spain of the royal audience of Caracas will be established in 1786. Hence, the post-colonial legality, it will express in a weak institutional, republic institutionality, reunited civil heroes of the independence, but also in a deviation to substitute the citizen concept immediately after and identify it to the soldier. So the way to follow this line of thought is that this line refers to the time, to the transculturality, to the law. It will take us to examine how the Constitution of the Republic addressed the territorial issue and what is important before the objective reality, before the trial that is now before the International Court of Justice, which is going to be decided the nudity of not the award that dispossessed Venezuela part of its territory. The second aspect is what the Constitution said about this territory. I will go directly to point out that we have given an entrance, a social cultural entrance, to determine what is the Constitution about the territory, recognize what it was, the treatment that it was given in relation to the Essequibo. But the issue of the Essequibo to the Venezuelans is a draw. It's a draw of our maps in an immense piece of land with lines that it says in reclamation. I'll say that that adjective, it makes it difficult that a Venezuelan consider it of its own. When the Republic, the Federal of Guayana considered parts of this territory. The Cooperative Republic of Guayana holds a territory that with the basis of the Paris Aware, without attending that entire reclamation territory. Because they base themselves in the Paris Award with an award that is considered valid. Our territory of Essequibo belongs to Venezuela because it belongs to the Captain General of Venezuela. I do believe that importance to affirm in all constitutions, since I'll say the Constitution of Cúcuta of 1821 until the Constitution of 1830, which is the one that definitely, from the point of view, our internal point of view, determined that that's the territory of Venezuela. It takes us to, with some addition, in this case, as it was pointed out by Ayala in relation to the treaties, always in all of them, it was established that the territory of Venezuela, it will comprehend all of it, that before the political transformation of 1810, it was named, called as Captain General of Venezuela. With this, I would like to move forward with the fundamental point, which is that time made that constitutions were incorporated of the 20th century and even more the 21st century. All that it has to do with the law of the sea and all the elements that are part of the issue of sovereignty. Hence, the Constitution of the 1861 talked then of the modifications that were resulted from the treaties that were validly signed by the Republic, affirming that the declaratory of invalidity will seem necessary, and even more, this affirmation commit us in the continuity of the work now in the open trial before the International Court of Justice, meaning that internally, even though we know that the fundamental work is international law and international public law, internally to the internal of the nation, these elements that were reflected in the Constitution, it must be highlighted for it to be the sentiment, the citizen sentiment, the motivation it placed before the problematic that we are making reference to. Since, in this sense, I would like to highlight a conclusion that is that let's ask ourselves, where does it come from, the consistency of establish the territory, the Venezuelan territory? As many times repeating all constitutions in relation to our territory. The mark, as I said, it was a constitution of 1821 and internally the constitution of 1830. But this affirmation takes all strength and affirmation of all constitution. When from the faculty that comes from the General Courts, the 4th of December of 1836 resigns forever to his successors the sovereignty, rights, and actions that it corresponded over the territory, American territory, known as the previous name of Captain General of Venezuela, now Republic of Venezuela. Given to the consequence of this resign, they were recognized the sovereignty of the Republic and incorporated to its territory definitively when it was corresponded, shading away, and I read expressly, shading away the intentions of England. We have to recognize, and with this I end, that in relation to the territory of the Republic, that consistency, that a constitutional consistency to establish in every single constitution, that it corresponded to the Captain General of Venezuela in every awaken the sentiments of the Venezuela. And in order to achieve that, we have to awaken and to hear the text, the constitutional text. We have to achieve the conversion of all Venezuelans to the value and the constitutional principles, because the Constitution, it is at the end the history of a conversion, of colonized to Venezuela, of conquered to free, of excluded to integrated. The territory of the Esequibo is of Venezuela. Thank you very much.
tienen que prenderle el micrófono al doctor Ramón Escobar León. Ya. Adelante, Ramón.
Go ahead, Ramon.
¿Aló?
Sí, te oímos.
Yeah,
Sí.
we hear you.
Bueno, con esta excelente
Yes, so with this excellent intervention presentation,
el ciclo de
we
exposición
end the cycle of presentations that Professor Cecilia Sosa
de su erudición en estos asuntos y me complace
show her knowledge on these issues. And I'm pleased that all four presentations were coherent within among each other. Now
disponemos unos minutos para
we have a few minutes for questions.
yo no veo aquí preguntas, pero sí recuerdo
I don't see here questions, but I do remember that Allan Brewer-Carías
tenía disponible unos mapas
have available some maps. Since I don't see here questions,
yo sugeriría que el doctor
well, I'll suggest that Dr.
ponga de algunos
Brewer-Carías
minutos para que presente los mapas.
will have some minutes for he can present his maps that he announced during his presentation. Please go ahead.
Estaba bloqueado, pero bueno, voy a hacer el intento de
I'm gonna try to present the maps.
¿Me oyen? Sí, se oye y se ve muy bien el mapa. Perfecto, bueno. Este es
Perfect then. So this is the
la secuencia de mi exposición.
following the sequence of my presentation. This is
Una carta
the charter
podrían considerarse las
of what could be considered the provinces. The colonial prophecy. This is dated 1564, and it is precisely
de la ocupación colonial
the process of the colonial occupation.
con las
So there we can see the map of the provinces of Santa Fe and the province
Venezuela,
that after are Venezuela. And as we see,
territorio
it has a territory
Río Esequibo.
until the Essequibo River.
Vamos a ver cómo paso yo ahora. Ajá. Esta es una
This is
un mapa.
a map.
Me excusan que bueno, no se puede ver abajo, pero tiene fecha.
I apologize because it doesn't show clearly here, but it dates
1778, como que es de
1778,
de Venezuela.
where it was constituted the Captain General of Venezuela.
Aquí, la provincia de Guayana materialmente llega al Orinoco, que era la idea.
The province of Guayana reaches to the Orinoco River, which was the initial idea until there it reached the province. But here we see on the map that makes reference to some colonies, Dutch colonies, in that part,
Al este del Esequibo,
in this part to the east of Essequibo.
todo el territorio es
But apart from that,
Amazonas,
all the territories until Amazon, part of which is the province of Guayana.
Luego tengo
Then I have this map, which is the territory of the Republic of Colombia,
ya lo que sería la República de Colombia,
then, which is what is going to be the Republic of Colombia within the framework of the laws of 1819 and 1821. And there the viceroyalty and the captaincy. And there we see clearly that the east border of the province of Guayana also in the Esequibo. The same is in this map. The map of Mariano Torrente. And again, it reaches until Essequibo, completely until the Essequibo, all what is the province, and with a divisory line that it was below. So this is the representation that Corasi does of the Republic of Colombia. According to the law of division, the territorial division of 1824, and if you see here, here is where it appears. The indication of the mark that the territories, well, it doesn't show as well, but this territory between the Morocco River and the Essequibo, in the part of the ending of the Essequibo River, is going to be occupied territory and dispossessed by the English, and that is what that's what it appears in the map of Códice, both in the part of the south, the territory occupied by the English, both the north part and south part in the Essequibo.
Luego,
then, this is the representation of what is the Republic of Venezuela in 1830, when it was declared as an independent state. In that map that is also from Códice Atlas, it appears that zone between Morocco River and Essequibo, it appears excluded. That is the area determined by Simón Bolívar in the decree of 1817. That it says that the province reached to the north until Morocco Fort, and that it appears excluded from the map of Códice. However, as I was saying, that decree of year 17 from the legal and constitutional point of view, it appears in the text of the 18 and then in the 30, that it talks about the general captaincy of Venezuela and the provinces that belong to the general captaincy of Venezuela, that it reaches until the Essequibo River, and there is no exclusion at all of the territory.
Esto mismo, pero es el mismo agrandado, aparece.
This is the same, but we can see it a bit better. The same occupied territory by the English, and then it comes a map. The report of the president that the president of the United States was requested in a report which is
presidida por un juez americano.
That commission was presided by an American judge that the last name was Brewer, actually. And there, the European occupations in the regions of the Essequibo appear. Things that is very small here, but all of the green, the mentions in green are Spanish occupation that goes until Essequibo, even though the occupations that are in red are the occupations that were mentioned by Dr. Ayala of the occupations precisely to the east of Essequibo River, which are the occupations by the Dutch. And then the importance of the federal territories in the process of the confirmation of territory of Venezuela is that those territories, those federal territories that were created in the Constitution of 1858 and then in the Constitution of 1864, then they were organized during the second half of the 19th century. In the time of the Federation, they appear clearly there. The Delta territory that reaches onto the Essequibo, and the Yuari territory that it reaches also until the Essequibo. So that border of the Essequibo, it has never changed. It has always been there, and that is also appearing in the documents of the federal territories and also in the territories of the Delta, that it appears until the Essequibo territory. I must say also an interesting thing: the organic codes that were dictated for these federal territories. And I wanted to propose the Academy to edit a document, because in those codes in that territory, Wari and Delta, and one that was dictated for all the federal territories to the high Orinoco, Caura, Uruari and Delta. It was a code that was dictated to the end of the 19th century, which is a phenomenal piece because there are entire chapters that adapt the civil code, the commerce code, the penal code. They were adapted to the application of the federal territories. So there are legal pieces of very much interest in a clear determination of that border, of all that was the Venezuelan Guayana in the Essequibo River. I will send the document that I have written in conjunction with this data that have this maps. Thank you very much. No, thank you. Thank you, Professor Brewer, to illustrate us with these maps. An image says more than 1,000 words, it said. So this is good that it was, he got to present it at the end of this presentation, because you get to clarify all of many things that were said by the previous presenters. From the point of view of the constitutional history and also viewing the maps, we have been victims of a dispossession that is evidenced again by this presentation. I must add that I thank you. I thank the suggestion because it's the first time that I share a screen in Zoom. So at least I learned this. Natalie from Universitas taught me yesterday. So we know that he's a writer, a tireless writer, and I know that he's gonna do it. But I'm gonna remember him that the forum of today is registered here, so we can do the note of presentation, and as an addition to these maps as well. It's a very important work. Herman González Oropesa gave a lot of importance to the study of the maps, and he went to England to research. So congratulations, and thank you to Dr. Brewer too. And I want to say something as well. All the documents of the Commission of the President of the United States in 1897, in conjunction with all these maps and books, yesterday actually, they were donated by the Dr. Diego Arria that he has in his exposition, and we will be sending it to the library, the Allan Brewer-Carías Library of Universidad Católica Venezuela. With news, then we end this event. Thank you very much again to the four.
Doctor Escobar.
Dr. Escobar, if you allow, I will add a comment before we close. That I think is very important, and I'm gonna do it briefly, which is the following. As I said in my intervention, the defense of Venezuela, it couldn't base itself in the invocation nor of its constitutions or its laws only because of the reason that there are legal acts of domestic law. It could be in both in the extent that their expression of official posture and an affirmation of its position, and at the end of no acceptation. And after we saw the maps that Brewer-Carías show us, and we have seen in each other, we have come. I think it is worth to say two things. First, those two occupations is for the Dutch, the occupations of Merana Berberice and the east of Essequibo that were recognized expressly and that are in those maps are the only ones that had a legal legitimacy respalded by history. The rest of them, they were consistently occupied, repealed, and even military during the time of the colony. So that's a very large territory. Most of these sectors not able to get in them. So in second, when you see them, their missions of Capuchin Franciscans and Jesuits until they were exposed, by the way. It is very important, and it's a policy of population. Basically, the province of Guayana was the one that it was most benefited by the policy of missions that, by the way, was a policy of transition, and that the historians explain it very well, that it was a close missions as the idea of the direction were to convert the religious authority eventually. And that's how it was said by Dr. Brewer-Carías, it was the crown of Spain. It were not religious enterprises, but other official. So there are official occupations. So the agreement that it was reached in 1850 between the Great Britain and Venezuela is that they will abstain to do any additional occupations in the territory that it was in dispute. At any case, they were not, they're going to be recognized. So that line after Schomburg, that all deploy that pretends to reach until the ending of Orinoco River is, from the point of view of the international law, is invalid. It doesn't have effect because both parts were made an agreement that they were not going to have an effect, and they would abstain to do more occupations. And that's one of the rules of the Treaty of 1807. So the Treaty of Washington to establish the arbitration award, to establish the legal delimitation, only could be taken into account possessions that had a duration, consistent duration of more than 50 years. So that we have to close in 1850 for two reasons: because of the Treaty of Washington and because of the agreement that both countries were reached. So the arguments that we have seen from the part of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, that they insist to establish points and agreements and possessions, are illegitimate positions that cannot give recognition, and it adds to the invalidity of the arbitration award of 1899. So I just simply wanted to do these notes, which I think it is important to link with what has been said. Thank you very much to Carlos Ayala for this addition that he gives. So we are now finished. Cecilia Sosa wants to say something.
Micrófono, doctora Sosa.
Creo que se lo tienen.
No, quería 2 minutos solamente para decir.
I wanted 2 minutes only to say that the subject of today, beyond the depth that we have assumed, that the subject of the constitutions is like to the Venezuela internally has the importance to generate a strategy of citizen commitment as per to the trial before International Court of Justice. So really, if the Venezuelans, wake up in regards to what is happening before the International Court of Justice, that the commitment in relation to that trial, and we maintain ourselves in the sphere from the judicial strategy, it's not going to be complete. I think we need to stimulate and motivate. And I think that the subject today was to, and I think we have accomplished that, how to link with the citizen. That right now, to the citizens, the history of the Essequibo doesn't tell them anything. And we cannot wait until the moment that we have to appear before the International Court of Justice to motivate the citizens, to tell them that that territory belongs to Venezuela, or to determine how, constitutionally speaking, independently of what regime accompanied to that Constitution, it was consistent to keep that territory that it was dispossessed by the English. Thank you very much. But I think that it's very important to think about a strategy to generate that citizen commitment, precisely because the subject of the Constitution, it will stay only as domestic law. Thank you very much, Cecilia, Sosa, for that reflection. We have concluded now. There are no questions. So we have this acquisition. So to close the act, I give the floor to the second vice president of the Academy, Dr. Rafael Varela Madrid. Please, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Ramon. In the first place, congratulate you for the moderation of extraordinary moderation that you have done this morning. And remember that Dr. Héctor Faúndez Ledesma has designed this program. So a very important program of these events in regards to this very important issue for the country. Give thanks to the participants in the events, to Dr. Allan Brewer-Carías, Jesús, María, Casal, Carlos Ayala, Corao, Cecilia, Sosa, Gómez, again, to the moderator, Ramón Escobar León, and all whom to have joined us through Zoom and YouTube. I want to highlight that this event has been recorded and is fundamental importance, and to all people it will be recorded of YouTube channel of Universitas, and is also going to be saved in the YouTube channel of the Academy. This I say because there's no doubt of the importance of this event. The coherence, the depth of the presentations of today's presentations are an invaluable material in the defense of our territory. The Academy, it is proud to have currently complied its duty with these extraordinary presentations. Good afternoon to everyone.